Hi, everybody. It's Saturday afternoon, and I wanted to take a few minutes to go through the new changes coming from the GRAR documents. I'm sure everybody saw an email this week with a PowerPoint slide attached for the upcoming changes for 2022. The GRAR Forms Committee has worked awful hard on this. There's some important changes to note. And so we're going to jump right into this. I'm going to share my screen here with you. Hopefully everybody will be able to see this. And sure, there we go. It's nice of them to share out this PowerPoint. Makes it very easy for us to read and understand, but I want to make sure that we give you some explanation on this as well. So first, a bit of background. They talk about how we are regional now with our forms, and that you've got the Battle Creek, GRAR, which is Greater Regional, also known as Grand Rapids, Montcalm, Mason, Southwest Michigan Association, the West Central Board, and West Michigan Lakeshore all comprise our regional forms alliance, I guess, if you will. So on the listing agreement, nothing too major on this one. Paragraph 18, they changed some language to say the seller directs the broker that letters from the buyer will not be presented with any offers to purchase. So we used to have a choice to present love letters or not. I think everybody's under the realization now that these buyer love letters can consist of a possible fair housing violation if we're making decisions based on the nature of the buyers and not the financial wherewithal and the bottom line for the seller. So again, just a good idea not to get involved with buyer love letters, and listing agreement now states that. So paragraph 27, they added language for it used to ask if you were a US citizen. Now you have the option also of resident alien, and this pertains to Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, otherwise known as FIRPTA, and the tax consequences for someone not of US citizenship selling property. So as always, we would recommend that a seller, if they are of this status, discuss their tax implications with a CPA. This is very involved. There's a lot to it. You can click on this link here to read more about FIRPTA and how it might impact a transaction. I would recommend that you pull up this PowerPoint and click on that if you want more details on it. We're not going to go into tax law today. So purchase agreement. This is the big one, paragraph 14, well and septic. They are now giving the buyer the option to pay for a well and septic inspection. General consensus is that nobody really likes this change, but it was necessary. If you go down here and read the rationale behind it, that it is a challenging paragraph. We know that in West Michigan, Kent County, for example, they've opted not to impose a point of sale, but we've just kind of had this notion in Kent County that the seller pays for it and we continue to ask for it. So the form now gives parties the option to choose if it will be the seller or the buyer that pays for the inspection. Apparently, some of our board members are not of the same protocol as we are, and that buyer can pay for those. So trying to be consistent across all these different real estate boards is what really drove this. Not in love with it given the current market conditions. Buyer goes and pays for a well and septic report. There's a lot to this, and so be cautious before just having a buyer pay for a well and septic report. If that report comes back bad, you've already passed inspections. The buyer can request still that the seller make repairs. The seller doesn't have to agree to it, but cannot terminate the sale. That's another thing you want to keep in mind there. So again, for me, the other section is so important down here, and that's where I always add language that says seller to provide recent pump card within the past 6 months and well and septic inspection to be performed by a state licensed sanitarian. So it doesn't need to be somebody from the county health department, unless you're in Ottawa County. In Kent County, it could be, an inspector that's licensed as a sanitarian. And then, who that's going to be paid for by. Now, here you have that seller box still. I think it's still a good idea to put that on the seller, but market conditions are going to dictate maybe otherwise. So doesn't really change the fact that every county has their own protocol. We know pumping isn't always necessary or required in certain counties. Ottawa County, for example, prefers that, or actually mandates that you do not pump prior to the inspection. And then they will tell you whether you need to pump, and Kent County is the exact opposite. So you get into some of these outlying areas. The best advice I can give you is call the county health department in the area where that takes place and see what their regulations are, and then write your purchase agreement accordingly. So now it may drive you to, as a listing agent, have your seller perform this in advance. Now, again, disclosure issues aside, I think it would give everybody a benefit to have that done in advance, so a seller can provide it to a buyer. They know they're not going to have to pay for it. We've got it in front of the buyer so they can make a decision. Now, again, if it comes back bad, there's going to be action that needs to be taken. Whereas if somebody's in this market waiving inspections and asking it not to be done, then that's buyer beware at that point. So, but if they know about something, still has to be disclosed. So step lightly. If you have any other questions on this, please don't hesitate to contact me, because it is a case-by-case basis depending on the county you're in and what the strategy would be, whether you're representing a buyer or a seller. Paragraph 15, inspections and investigations. This is your standard inspection clause in the contract. Nothing too major on this, except that you now have the ability to adjust that 10-day window. We've been doing it for 2 years now, inspections to be done within 5 days, whatever. Now we have the ability to go ahead and just put in there 5 days, 3 days, whatever works for your buyer to help be competitive. 10 days has been our standard in West Michigan, in the Grand Rapids area, but not necessarily throughout all of West Michigan on these other boards. So just kind of gets consistent. So, and that rationale is explained here. Again, you still have the waiver, caution on that, and the ability to maybe pre-inspect the house with an inspector of your choice prior to writing the offer. So on to paragraph number 20, a change to provide clarity. This pertains to prorations, rent being the big thing in most of these issues outside of property taxes, but you could have association dues if they're assuming a mortgage, things like that. For the purpose of calculating prorations, it is presumed that the seller owns the property through the day before closing. So if you're closing on the 15th, it's prorated to the seller for the 14th. Buyer takes 15th on through the rest of the month. Pretty simple there. And then they throw this breaking news slide at us here, and it says, new paragraph, significant change to the purchase agreement. Paragraph 22, entirely new paragraph pertaining to pre-closing walkthroughs. Now, I've been writing in our purchase agreement, buyer to have final walkthrough of the property within 48 hours or 24 hours prior to closing, depending on their availability and the situation of the sellers. This gives that right. This says 3 days of the scheduled closing date, so that would stretch it out to 72 hours. And the purpose of the walkthrough is to determine that the property is in a substantially similar condition as of the effective date, and any contractually agreed upon items have been fulfilled. So, what we worry about as listing agents for this type of thing is that the buyer is going to come through and start, oh, there's a smudge on the wall. And in fact, that's explained in the rationale here. It's not an opportunity for the buyer to re-inspect the home. They've had that opportunity. And it is, however, an opportunity for them to verify repairs. If there has been major damage to a home since their walkthrough and something needs to be dealt with, it could come up during this walkthrough period and then hold up or postpone a closing until things are remedied or figured out financially. And I've never had too much of an issue outside of COVID shutdown March and April of 2020, where we've had an issue with being able to even get in a home for a walkthrough. I've had the occasional father of the buyer show up with his ladder and he wants to go back up in the attic or, something to that effect. But, overall, it's been a very good experience. It's typically not a bad idea to walk through the house, even if there is possession after closing. And keep in mind that, this doesn't preclude the contractual obligations between the buyer and the seller. And so to have a walkthrough, they could waive it. It may be more competitive to do that in this environment. Again, I caution against it, but use your best judgment on whether or not you want to waive that walkthrough or keep that in the language. So if you're writing offers with zero contingencies, cash, no inspections, no walkthroughs, no well and septic inspection, you're going to be competitive, but as long as your buyer understands the risks associated with that. Seller signature section is consistent with the other paragraph regarding U.S. citizenship. On the purchase agreement now, it adds that resident alien language that we talked about previously. So mutual release, they've updated the mutual release agreement, changed the term from cancellation to termination of the agreement. Kind of a little wordplay there, shouldn't be too confusing for anybody. And also added language in here, provided that the foregoing release shall not apply to any claims of the listing broker pursuant to its existing listing agreement in the event that sellers subsequently sell the property to the buyers. Took out language of a fill in the blank type protection period for a number of months. And so what this does, their rationale behind that is explained here. Change prevents the possibility of a number being entered into the protection period field in the mutual release that might not be consistent with the protection period that was agreed upon within the listing agreement. So I like it from that perspective, but keep in mind your buyer agency also has a protection period in there that would also come into play should the buyer go and purchase this property outside of that protection period that the listing agreement has. So it's a little listing broker centric, I guess would be the best way to say it. Don't let it get you hung up on things. Your buyer agency contract with your buyer is still going to come into play there. It would just mean that, to me, that the buyer would need to pay that commission if the listing protection period has already expired. So, but typically we don't see a lot of people going and buying homes after mutual release anyway. So again, the risk of this happening is not all that great. So moving on to the seller's disclosure exemption statement. So we've long known that there's a handful of reasons why a seller does not have to fill out a seller's disclosure statement in the state of Michigan. One being it's new construction, the builder, doesn't have to. Third party sales like relo companies, they're a moment in time when they own the house and they have you sign off and say that, hey, we just don't know anything about this house. We're just a fiduciary intermediary on that. So the disinterested party of an estate, that's managing the affairs of the estate, never has maybe stepped foot in the house, can't know condition of the house. This does not provide protection from a landlord who's not on site but still pays property management bills and repair bills, still owns the house, still should know everything about the house, still has to be filled out. So it specifically explains those parties in here that are not required to sign. And what it does is the change that they've added is the buyer's acknowledgement of that. And so it can't come up during the escrow period or after the closing to say, hey, you never furnished us a seller's disclosure statement. Well, here's why. Buyer acknowledges and signs this. Good change. One more document to sign. If the seller sends this over, have your buyer sign it and explain to them why the seller does not have to sign that. So not a ton of changes this year. I think this is a good thing. Tend to prefer not to have a lot of changes, especially with challenging market conditions. I think the big one for you guys is going to be that well and septic issue, having your buyers possibly pay for it to be competitive, and the ramifications depending on which county you're working in as to what goes on with that. So should have these in zip forms and .loop shortly. It doesn't look like they're there yet from my side of things, what I can see, but I would imagine in the next few days we should have that available for you. So if there's any questions on this, we are going to go over this a little bit more at the company meeting, but wanted to get everybody an advance look at this and some explanation along with it, so we can start having that discussion if we've got any questions on it. Should look for more of these videos coming, trainings. We're going to try and do this on Zoom where we can put documents up and continue to train, and then just continue to get these out to you in YouTube, Facebook, email, whatever. So hopefully this was a benefit to you. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout. Thanks, and make it a good one.